All right, IB Physics. So hopefully you got a graph that looks something like this. And if you didn't, you can always change your answer and resubmit later. It's okay. So from example 2, we have first a negative velocity. Ooh, those are using the wrong words. This is something that's really hard. When your mind is not in the game, which clearly my mind is not in the game, you want to be really careful about what words you are using to describe what is happening. I am clearly not very focused right now. So on our velocity time graph, we have a negative slope, which means that we had a negative acceleration. In fact, the acceleration was -1 meters per second squared. Then we switched to a positive slope on the velocity time graph. We switched from, well, first we're slowing down and then we're actually speeding up in the negative direction. Kind of tricky. But we switched to having a positive acceleration, which means that we're actually slowing down in the negative direction. And then we start speeding up in the positive direction. And so here I have a positive slope, a positive acceleration of 2 meters per second squared. And then the last chunk is pretty boring. The velocity is constant. It's just staying at the same velocity the whole time, the same positive 2 meters per second the whole time, which means that the slope of this chunk is 0 meters per second squared, or an acceleration of 0 meters per second squared, or 0 meters per second, which is what an acceleration is. It's telling us we're not speeding up at all. So from this acceleration time graph, I'd like you to kind of think about, well, what if I had just given you an acceleration time graph? How might you switch to a velocity time graph? And you might suggest that area under the curve could be interesting. And if you suggested that, I'd say you've been paying attention to some interesting patterns here in physics class. So I'd like you to take a moment right now and actually actively figure out what is the area under the curve for each chunk, and moreover, what are the units for the area under the curve for each chunk. So that's going to be taking into consideration the units, let's say the units along the length of the boxes are in seconds, and then the units along the height of the boxes, so that's along this side, are in meters per second, or meters per second squared. So take a moment and decide what are the units of this area, and what do you think that that might be telling you? And that's actually this question here on the quiz. It's not a quiz, it's notes. You can retake it, but I'm hoping that it'll help you think it through.